The words hit me like shattered glass through a phone speaker. Your mom's too stupid to help you with that. Ask Vanessa instead. My 12-year-old daughter Sophie stood in my kitchen doorway, her face pale, her phone trembling in her small hand. I didn't understand at first why she looked so stricken, why tears pooled in her eyes as she pressed play on the recording again. Then I heard my ex-husband's voice, casual and cutting, dismissing me to our child as though I were nothing more than an inconvenience. That single sentence, captured accidentally during what Sophie thought was a homework call with her father, would eventually play in a courtroom and change everything. But before that moment of vindication came years of being underestimated, of rebuilding myself from fragments, of discovering that sometimes the cruelest words become the catalyst for the most profound transformation. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The marriage counselor's office smelled like lavender and false hope. I sat on the beige couch next to Derek, my husband of 14 years, watching him check his phone for the third time in 10 minutes. Our counselor, a patient woman named Dr. Reeves, asked us to share one thing we appreciated about each other. Derek glanced up briefly from his screen, his jaw tight with barely concealed irritation. She's organized, he said flatly. Keeps the house running. The comment felt like being reduced to a household appliance. I tried to catch his eye, searching for any remnant of the man who once called me brilliant, who supported my decision to pause my career in education to raise Sophie. The man sitting beside me now seemed like a stranger wearing my husband's face. That was our last session. Derek announced 2 weeks later that he wanted a divorce, delivering the news over dinner as casually as commenting on the weather. Sophie was at a friend's house. The pot roast I'd spent hours preparing sat untouched between us. I've met someone else, he continued, not quite meeting my eyes. Vanessa works in commercial real estate. She's ambitious, driven. We understand each other. The implication hung heavy in the air. Unlike you, his tone suggested. You, who gave up your teaching career. You, who chose Sophie over professional advancement. You, who became exactly what I asked you to become, and now I find it insufficient. What about Sophie? I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. She'll adjust. Kids are resilient. Derek finally looked at me then, and what I saw wasn't cruelty exactly, but something worse. Indifference. He had already moved on emotionally, had probably been gone for months while I remained oblivious, focused on parent-teacher conferences and soccer practices and keeping our home running smoothly. The divorce proceedings revealed just how thoroughly he prepared. Derek had consulted attorneys, moved assets, crafted a narrative where I was the dependent spouse who contributed nothing tangible to our partnership. My years of managing our household, of sacrificing career opportunities so he could accept promotions that required travel, of creating the stable home environment that allowed him to focus entirely on professional advancement, all of it was rendered invisible in legal documents that reduced my worth to dollar signs and earning potential. We sat across from each other in a conference room, lawyers flanking us like opposing generals. Derek's attorney, a sharp woman in an expensive suit, laid out their proposal. Derek would retain the house in Portland's Riverside area. I would receive minimal spousal support for just 3 years, barely enough to cover basic expenses. Joint custody of Sophie, but the arrangement heavily favored his schedule and convenience. My attorney, a kind man named Robert Shen who was working at reduced rates because I could barely afford representation, argued that 14 years of partnership deserved more consideration. Derek's career success was built on my unpaid labor at home. My interrupted career trajectory had direct financial consequences that shouldn't be dismissed. Mrs. Hayes chose to stay home, Derek's attorney countered smoothly. No one forced that decision. She can return to work now. The job market is open to everyone. The implication was clear. My choices, made jointly within our marriage, were now being weaponized against me. The education degree I'd earned years ago felt ancient and irrelevant. The teaching credentials I'd maintained but never used seemed like expensive paperweights. Who would hire a 38-year-old woman whose resume showed a 14-year gap? Derek sat through these discussions with an expression of bored patience, occasionally leaning over to whisper something to his attorney. He never once looked at me with recognition of our shared history, of the life we'd built together, of the promises we'd made when Sophie was born about partnership and mutual support. The final settlement was worse than I'd feared. The house would be sold, profit split, but after legal fees and debts I didn't know Derek had accumulated, my portion would barely cover first and last month's rent somewhere modest. 3 years of minimal spousal support. Joint custody with a schedule that accommodated Derek's work travel, meaning irregular, unpredictable time with Sophie. I signed the papers with hands that had forgotten how to stop shaking. Sophie took the news better than I expected, or perhaps she'd already sensed the fractures in our family foundation. She was 12, perceptive and sensitive, old enough to understand divorce but young enough to hope it might not destroy everything familiar. "Will I still see you both?" she asked, sitting on her bed surrounded by stuffed animals she was getting too old for but couldn't quite abandon. "Of course, sweetheart." I brushed hair back from her face. This child who looked so much like me it sometimes felt like seeing my younger self. "Nothing changes how much we both love you. But everything else changes," she said quietly, displaying the uncomfortable insight of children who grow up too fast. Derek moved out within a week, taking furniture I didn't realize he considered his until it disappeared. The house echoed strangely without his presence, both emptier and somehow easier to breathe in. He rented a modern apartment downtown, close to his office, close to Vanessa's condo. Sophie stayed with me during the week, spent alternating weekends with Derek when his schedule allowed. I threw myself into practical concerns because dwelling on emotional devastation felt like quicksand. I needed income. I needed a plan. I needed to figure out how to rebuild a life I'd thought was permanent. My friend Bridget, who I'd known since college and who had witnessed my entire relationship with Derek, came over with wine and reality checks. She worked as a nurse, had never married, and possessed the kind of clear-eyed pragmatism I desperately needed. "You have to go back to school," she said, sitting at my kitchen table while Sophie did homework in her room. "Update your credentials. The education field has changed completely since you were teaching." "With what money?" I asked, though I knew she was right. My settlement was enough to survive on, not enough to invest in retraining. "Student loans exist." Bridget fixed me with a look that allowed no argument. "You're smart, Lauren. You always were. Derek might have convinced you otherwise, but he was wrong." Her words touched something raw and true. When had I started believing Derek's subtle dismissals? The comments about my interests being frivolous, my concerns being overwrought, my ideas being impractical. The erosion had been so gradual I hadn't noticed myself shrinking to accommodate his expansion. I enrolled in a graduate program at Portland State University, pursuing an advanced degree in educational psychology. Classes were evening and online, scheduled around Sophie's needs. Student loans covered tuition. I took a part-time job at a tutoring center, helping high school students with college applications, earning just enough to supplement the diminishing spousal support. Those first months were a blur of exhaustion. I'd wake at 6 to get Sophie ready for school, work at the tutoring center until 3, pick Sophie up from after-school programs, help with her homework while doing my own, prepare dinner, and study until midnight. The house sold quickly in Portland's hot market, and I moved us into a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood with good schools and affordable rent. Sophie adjusted to our new normal with remarkable grace, though I caught her sometimes staring at nothing, her expression far too solemn for a 12-year-old. She spent every other weekend with Derek and Vanessa, coming home quiet and withdrawn in ways that worried me but that she insisted were fine. Derek's support, both financial and emotional, proved inconsistent. He canceled visits when work demanded his attention. He forgot to send the child support check on time, requiring awkward reminder texts. He questioned every expense I claimed for Sophie's needs, as though new shoes for a growing child were luxuries rather than necessities. My graduate program became my lifeline in unexpected ways. The work challenged me intellectually in ways I'd forgotten I needed. My professors treated my ideas with respect and interest. Fellow students, many of them also returning to education after time away, shared my sense of reclaiming something essential that had been set aside. One professor in particular, Dr. Helen Park, took an interest in my research on how parental conflict affects children's academic performance. She supervised my thesis work and, more importantly, reminded me that intelligence wasn't measured by salary or job title. "You have insights that can only come from lived experience," Dr. Park told me during one of our meetings in her cluttered office. "Don't dismiss that as less valuable than theory." Her encouragement felt like water on parched ground. I'd spent so long being told implicitly and explicitly that my contributions didn't matter, that being needed felt almost foreign. Sophie entered 7th grade that fall, navigating the treacherous social landscape of middle school while managing her divided home life. She grew quieter about her time with Derek, offering only minimal details when I asked. Fine became her standard response to questions about her weekends with him. Then came the homework incident that would change everything, though I didn't understand its significance at first. Sophie had a science project due, something complex about renewable energy that required research and calculations beyond her current skill level. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She called Derek one Thursday evening, hoping he might help her understand the math involved. He had an engineering background and had always been good with numbers. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when I heard Sophie's voice from her room, tentative and hopeful. "Dad? I need help with my science project. There's this equation I don't understand." A pause, then her voice again, smaller now. "Mom's helping, but the math part is really hard and I thought maybe you could explain it." Another pause, longer this time. When Sophie emerged from her room 20 minutes later, she looked pale and strange. She stood in the kitchen doorway holding her phone like it might burn her. "Mom," she said quietly. "I need to show you something." She pressed play on a recording. At first, I didn't understand what I was hearing. Background noise, the sounds of Derek's apartment, then his voice, clear and dismissive. "Sophie, I'm busy right now. Ask your mother." "But Dad," the math part is Sophie's voice, pleading slightly. "Your mom's too stupid to help you with that. Ask Vanessa instead. She actually understands complex concepts." The recording continued for a few more seconds, captured Derek saying something about calling back later, his tone impatient and final. Then silence. Sophie stared at me, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't mean to record it," she whispered. "I was trying to take notes on what he said to help, and I hit record by accident." "But Mom, what he said about you, that's not true. You're not stupid. You help me all the time." I pulled her into my arms, this girl who was trying to protect me when she should never have been put in that position. My own tears came then, not from Derek's words exactly, but from the casual cruelty of them, spoken to our daughter as though my worthlessness were simply an accepted fact. I should have known then that this recording would become important. I should have recognized it as evidence of something larger than one cruel comment. Instead, I simply held my daughter and promised her that her father was wrong, even as part of me wondered if maybe he wasn't. The comment haunted me more than it should have. I'd been working so hard to rebuild my confidence, to prove to myself that I had value beyond my role as Derek's wife. Yet here was confirmation of what I'd secretly feared, that he genuinely viewed me as intellectually inferior, that his dismissiveness during our marriage wasn't frustration but honest assessment. I threw myself harder into my studies, as though academic success might somehow refute his judgment. My grades were excellent. My thesis on parental conflict and child development was selected for presentation at a regional education conference. Dr. Park recommended me for a competitive internship at a nonprofit focused on supporting children from divorced families. None of it felt like enough to shake the words that had lodged themselves in my psyche. "Your mom's too stupid to help." Sophie's relationship with Derek grew more strained over the following months. She started requesting to skip some of her scheduled weekends with him, claiming homework or plans with friends. When she did go, she returned increasingly withdrawn. "He doesn't really want me there," she confessed one Sunday evening after Derek dropped her off an hour early because Vanessa had planned a dinner party. "He and Vanessa are always busy with their friends or going out. I just sit in the guest room and watch TV." I wanted to rage at Derek for his neglect, for treating our daughter like an inconvenience, for breaking promises about staying actively involved in her life. Instead, I documented everything. The cancelled visits, the early drop-offs, the forgotten school events. My attorney had warned me that custody arrangements could be modified if circumstances changed significantly. Then Derek filed a motion to reduce his child support payments, claiming his expenses had increased and I should be working full-time rather than pursuing my degree. The motion included language about my lifestyle choices and implied that my graduate program was self-indulgent rather than practical career development. The court date was set for early spring, just weeks before I would complete my master's degree. My attorney Robert Chin reviewed Derek's filing with a frown, his normally calm demeanor showing cracks of frustration. "He's painting you as irresponsible," Robert explained during our meeting in his modest office. "Suggesting you're living off his support while pursuing expensive education instead of maximizing income." "But the program leads to better employment," I protested. "I'm investing in future stability, not being frivolous." "I know that. You know that. We need to make sure the judge knows that." Robert tapped his pen against the documents. "Tell me again about your current employment and prospects." I outlined my part-time tutoring position, my internship with the nonprofit, the job prospects once I completed my degree. Educational consultants were in demand. School districts needed specialists in trauma-informed education. My thesis research had attracted attention from several potential employers. "That's good," Robert said. "Strong trajectory. But Derek's attorney will argue you could be working full-time now at any number of jobs rather than being supported while you study." The unfairness of it burned. Derek had supported his own career ambitions at the expense of everything else, including our family. Now he framed my attempt to rebuild professional credibility as selfishness. "What about his relationship with Sophie?" I asked. "The cancelled visits, the lack of engagement when she is with him." "Harder to prove without documentation," Robert admitted. "It's your word against his, and judges are reluctant to modify custody without clear evidence of harm or neglect." I thought about Sophie's phone, about the recording that captured Derek's dismissive comment. I'd saved it, backed it up, some instinct telling me it might matter someday. I mentioned it to Robert almost as an afterthought. "He has this recording from a few months ago. Sophie accidentally captured him saying something pretty harsh about me to her." "What kind of harsh?" Robert's attention sharpened. I pulled up the file on my phone, let him listen to Derek's voice casually informing our daughter that I was too stupid to help with homework. Robert listened twice, his expression growing more focused. "This is evidence of parental alienation," he said carefully. "Deliberately undermining you to your daughter, damaging her relationship with you. Courts take this seriously, especially when it's documented." I hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of using Sophie's accidental recording against Derek. It felt like weaponizing our daughter's pain. "Lauren," Robert said gently, reading my reluctance. "This isn't about revenge. This is about protecting Sophie from ongoing exposure to a parent who demeans her other parent. Children internalize these messages. He's not just hurting you with these comments. He's hurting her." His words settled something that had been churning in my chest since I first heard the recording. This wasn't about my wounded pride. This was about preventing Derek from poisoning Sophie's perception of me, from teaching her that dismissing and devaluing people was acceptable behavior. "We can use this," I said quietly. The weeks leading up to the court date passed in a haze of preparation. Robert coached me on testimony, on staying calm and factual regardless of what Derek's attorney might imply about my choices. Dr. Park wrote a letter on my behalf, detailing my academic excellence and professional potential. My thesis advisor did the same. I compiled documentation of every cancelled visit, every late support payment, every instance of Derek's diminishing involvement in Sophie's life. Bridget came over the night before the hearing, finding me surrounded by papers and notes, anxiety making my hands shake. "You're going to be fine," she said firmly, moving folders aside to sit next to me. "You've done everything right. You've built a real future, not just coasted on his support. What if the judge thinks I should have just gotten any job?" I voiced my deepest fear. What if investing in education looks like a luxury? Then the judge is an idiot, Bridget said bluntly. But judges aren't usually idiots. They see hundreds of these cases. They know the difference between someone genuinely rebuilding and someone taking advantage. I wanted to believe her. That night I barely slept, imagining every possible outcome, every way Derek's attorney might twist my choices into evidence of poor judgment. The courthouse was exactly as intimidating as I'd feared. Gray stone and security checkpoints and people in professional attire moving with purpose through hallways that smelled like floor polish and anxiety. Sophie stayed with Bridget that day. We'd agreed she didn't need to be present for legal arguments about support payments and parenting plans. Derek arrived with his attorney, both of them wearing expensive suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He glanced at me once, his expression unreadable, then turned his attention to his lawyer's briefing. We were called into the courtroom mid-morning. The judge, a woman in her 50s named Judge Morrison, reviewed the case file while we took our seats. My hands were sweating. I pressed them against my lap, trying to project confidence I didn't entirely feel. Derek's attorney went first, painting me as someone who had chosen education over employment, who prioritized personal development over maximizing income to reduce dependence on Derek's support. She made it sound almost reasonable, the way she framed it. Why should Mr. Hayes continue supporting his ex-wife's graduate education when she could be working full-time? My attorney countered with evidence of my job prospects post-graduation, of the strategic thinking behind investing in credentials that would lead to stable career advancement rather than taking any available minimum wage position. He highlighted Derek's canceled visits, his reduced involvement in Sophie's life despite having the financial resources and time to stay engaged. Then came the testimony. Derek took the stand first, composed and professional. He explained his position calmly. He wanted to support his daughter fully. He questioned whether continuing to support my education was reasonable when I could be working and contributing more to Sophie's expenses. When cross-examined by Robert, Derek maintained his calm demeanor even when asked about his canceled visits with Sophie. My work requires flexibility, he explained. I rearrange when possible, but sometimes business demands take priority. And your involvement in Sophie's education? Robert asked. Her school events, parent-teacher conferences? I attend when my schedule allows, Derek said smoothly. The words were careful, practiced. He'd been coached well on how to present himself as the reasonable parent trying to balance work and family. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand feeling like I might be sick, but once there, something steadied in me. These weren't Derek's attorneys to impress anymore. This was a judge whose job was to see clearly through performance to truth. I answered questions about my education, my career prospects, my financial planning. I explained my tutoring work and internship, the way I balanced school and parenting. I described Sophie's needs, her struggles with the divorce, the importance of stability. Derek's attorney tried to rattle me, implying my degree was self-indulgent, my career plans unrealistic. I answered each question calmly, refusing to be defensive. Then Robert played the recording. The courtroom was very quiet as Derek's voice filled the space. Your mom's too stupid to help you with that. Ask Vanessa instead. Judge Morrison's expression shifted, something cold entering her eyes as she glanced at Derek. His composure cracked slightly, his jaw tightening. Mr. Hayes, the judge said after the recording ended, did you make that statement to your daughter about her mother? I may have been frustrated, Derek started, but his attorney placed a hand on his arm, silencing him. The recording speaks for itself, Robert said quietly. This isn't isolated frustration, Your Honor. This is a pattern of undermining Mrs. Hayes to their daughter, of teaching Sophie that her mother is incompetent and unworthy of respect. Judge Morrison asked to see the documentation of Derek's canceled visits, his reduced engagement. She reviewed the letters from my professors, the evidence of my academic performance and career trajectory. The hearing that was supposed to last an hour stretched past 3. When the judge finally spoke, her tone was measured but unmistakably pointed. Mr. Hayes, I find your motion to reduce support both premature and concerning. Mrs. Hayes is not simply prolonging dependence. she's investing strategically in credentials that will lead to stable employment. Your characterization of her choices as irresponsible appears to be part of a broader pattern of disrespect that extends to your interactions with your daughter. Derek's face reddened slightly, but he remained silent. Furthermore, Judge Morrison continued, the evidence suggests your involvement in Sophie's life has decreased significantly while your ex-wife has maintained consistent, engaged parenting despite significant financial constraints. That recording is particularly troubling. Parental alienation is serious, Mr. Hayes. Teaching your daughter to disrespect her mother damages her, not just Mrs. Hayes. The judge's ruling came swift and decisive. Derek's motion to reduce support was denied. Instead, his child support payments would increase slightly to better reflect Sophie's actual needs. The custody arrangement would be modified to require more consistent, predictable visitation from Derek rather than the irregular schedule that suited his convenience. And Mr. Hayes, Judge Morrison concluded, I strongly suggest you consider how your words about Sophie's mother affect your daughter's well-being. If further evidence of parental alienation comes before this court, custody arrangements may be revisited more substantially. We left the courthouse in something like shocked silence. Robert looked pleased but professional. Bridget, who had come to wait during the proceedings, hugged me hard enough to crack ribs. You did it, she whispered. You actually did it. But I didn't feel triumphant exactly. I felt exhausted and relieved and strangely sad. The marriage was over. The judge's words wouldn't suddenly make Derek respect me. What had been won was simply the right to rebuild without being actively sabotaged, the validation that my choices had merit despite Derek's dismissal of them. That evening, I picked Sophie up from Bridget's house and we went for pizza at our favorite neighborhood spot. She knew something significant had happened but not the details. I explained carefully that the judge had decided some things about support and visits, that everything would be okay. Did Dad get in trouble? She asked quietly, picking at her pizza. Not trouble exactly, I said. But the judge reminded him that parents need to speak respectfully about each other, especially to their kids. Sophie was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, very softly, I'm sorry I recorded that. I didn't mean to cause problems. I reached across the table, taking her hand. You didn't cause anything, sweetheart. You accidentally captured the truth, that's all. And sometimes the truth is important, even when it's uncomfortable. She looked up at me then, her eyes so serious. You're not stupid, Mom. You're the smartest person I know. Those words, from my 12-year-old daughter who had been caught between her parents' dysfunction, meant more than any judge's ruling possibly could. I squeezed her hand gently. Thank you, baby. That means everything. We finished our pizza talking about school and friends and her upcoming soccer tournament. Normal things. Safe things. The kind of conversation that had been hard to have when every interaction felt weighed down by legal battles and Derek's ongoing dismissiveness. That night, after Sophie was asleep, I sat at my tiny kitchen table with my laptop open to the thesis document I'd been working on for months. The words came easier now, flowing without the constant internal critic that had whispered Derek's assessment of my intelligence every time I struggled with complex ideas. Your mom's too stupid to help. The phrase had carved itself into my psyche, becoming the voice of every doubt and fear. But sitting there in my modest apartment, having just been validated by a judge and recognized by my professors and hugged by my daughter, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't writing to prove Derek wrong anymore. I was writing because the work mattered, because I had insights worth sharing, because intelligence wasn't singular or simple but multifaceted and contextual. The recording that had captured Derek's cruelty had served its purpose in court. Now I could set it down, stop carrying it like a stone. He had been wrong about me. More importantly, I had been wrong to ever half believe him. I closed my laptop and looked around my small apartment. Not much by Derek's standards probably. But it was mine. Built by my choices and efforts. Filled with evidence of Sophie's life, my studies, the friends who had stayed loyal. Every modest piece of furniture, every carefully managed bill, every late night of studying represented something Derek had dismissed as unimportant. the transformation hadn't happened in one moment. It had been accumulating slowly over months of small choices, small victories, small acts of refusing to accept his narrative about my worth. The court hearing was simply the moment when external validation caught up with internal knowing. I would graduate in 6 weeks. I already had 2 job interviews scheduled with school districts interested in trauma-informed education consultants. The nonprofit where I'd been interning had hinted at a full-time position opening up. None of it was certain yet, but all of it was possible. And that possibility, that potential, felt like oxygen after years of slow suffocation. Derek would continue being Derek, prioritizing his career and his new relationship and his version of reality where I was simply the failed first wife who hadn't been strong enough or smart enough. That was his story to carry now. I was done hauling it around on his behalf. My story was different. Messier but truer. Full of mistakes and struggles and moments of doubt. But also full of genuine achievement and hard-won confidence and the kind of strength that comes from rebuilding yourself piece by piece when everything falls apart. Sophie knocked on my door the next morning before school, already dressed and with her backpack ready. She looked more relaxed than I'd seen her in months. "Ready for breakfast?" I asked, heading toward the kitchen. "Mom," she said, stopping me. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. For going back to school and everything. I know it's been hard." The simple statement from my daughter, offered without prompting or agenda, nearly undid me. I pulled her into a hug, this girl who had become so much wiser than she should have needed to be. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of us both. We're doing this together." And we were. Not perfectly, not without struggles still ahead. But together, with honesty and effort and the kind of love that doesn't require anyone to be diminished for someone else to shine. The months ahead would bring graduation and job hunting and continued navigation of co-parenting with Derek. But standing in my kitchen that morning, holding my daughter before another school day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt like myself again. Not Derek's wife. Not the dismissed and devalued woman who had signed divorce papers with shaking hands. Just Lauren Hayes, mother and student and survivor and builder of new possibilities. The recording on Sophie's phone had played its part in one courtroom drama. But the real transformation wasn't about legal victories or proving Derek wrong. It was about the quiet, persistent work of refusing to accept someone else's cruel assessment as truth. "Your mom's too stupid to help." The words still stung when I remembered them. But they no longer defined me. They defined Derek's limitations, his inability to see value in anything that didn't serve his narrow definition of success. I had been helping Sophie all along, in ways that couldn't be reduced to equations or career achievements. I had been helping myself too, though I hadn't always recognized it. Every application submitted, every class completed, every moment of choosing forward motion over bitterness had been an act of helping. And I wasn't done yet. Not by a long measure. This was just the beginning. Graduation came on a warm June morning that felt like stepping through a doorway into a different life. I walked across the stage at Portland State University in a borrowed cap and gown, accepting my master's degree in educational psychology while Sophie cheered from the audience with Bridget. Derek hadn't come, citing a business commitment in Seattle, and his absence felt more like relief than disappointment. This achievement belonged to me alone, unmarred by his presence or judgment. Dr. Park found me afterward in the crowded reception hall, her smile genuine and warm as she handed me a glass of punch that tasted like institutional fruit and possibility. "I have something for you," she said, pulling an envelope from her bag. "A colleague of mine runs an educational consulting firm in Denver. They're expanding their trauma-informed education division and looking for someone with exactly your research background and practical experience." Denver. The word hung in the air like an invitation I hadn't known I was waiting for. I'd been applying to positions throughout Oregon, limiting myself to places where Sophie could maintain some proximity to Derek despite his inconsistent involvement. The thought of leaving Portland entirely hadn't occurred to me as an option. "It's a significant move," Dr. Park continued, reading my hesitation. "But sometimes distance provides clarity that proximity never can. Your work deserves a fresh audience, Lauren." People who will see your value immediately rather than through the lens of who you used to be. Her words struck something deep and true. Portland was full of ghosts and old narratives. Every neighborhood held memories of my marriage, every familiar street corner a reminder of the life that had dissolved. Sophie's friends were here, her school, the routine we'd carefully constructed. But what kind of future was I building if I remained tethered to a past that continually undermined my progress? I took the envelope, feeling its weight like a promise or a dare. "Thank you," I told Dr. Park. "For everything. For seeing me when I couldn't see myself." She squeezed my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You did the hard work, Lauren. I just pointed you in the right direction occasionally. Now go find out who you become when no one is watching with preconceptions." That evening I sat Sophie down in our living room, the envelope from Dr. Park on the coffee table between us like a third presence in the conversation. She was 13 now, poised between childhood and adolescence, old enough for honest discussions about major decisions. "I've been offered an interview in Denver," I began carefully. "For a job that's perfect for my degree and experience. It would mean moving, starting over somewhere new." Sophie's expression cycled through surprise, uncertainty, and something that might have been relief. "What about Dad?" she asked, though her tone suggested the question was obligatory rather than concerned. "You'd still see him during school breaks and summers. We'd work out a schedule that makes sense." I watched her face, trying to read the emotions she was learning to hide. "But sweetheart, this is a decision we make together. I won't uproot your life without your input." She was quiet for a long moment, picking at a loose thread on the couch cushion. Then she said softly, "I think I'd like to start over too. Everything here reminds me of when we were a family. Sometimes it's hard to be around all the places we used to go together." Her honesty pierced me. I'd been so focused on my own healing that I hadn't fully considered how Sophie carried her own weight of broken family dynamics and divided loyalties. A fresh start might liberate her as much as me. The interview was scheduled for mid-July, giving me 3 weeks to prepare. I researched Denver obsessively, learning about its neighborhoods and school systems and cost of living. The city sat at the base of the Rocky Mountains, a mile above sea level, with 300 days of sunshine annually. It felt symbolic somehow, all that elevation and light. Bridget drove me to the airport, her practical nurse's efficiency masking emotion until we reached the security checkpoint. "You're going to crush this interview," she said fiercely, hugging me hard. "And if Denver doesn't appreciate you, they're idiots and you come right back here where people know your worth." "I'm terrified," I admitted into her shoulder. "What if I'm making a huge mistake? What if I can't actually do this job? What if I'm exactly as incompetent as Derek always implied?" Bridget pulled back, gripping my shoulders and looking directly into my eyes. "Lauren Hayes, you listen to me. Derek was a small man who needed you to be smaller so he could feel big. You've spent 2 years proving him wrong. Don't you dare start believing his lies now." Her words steadied something that had been threatening to shake apart. I nodded, shouldered my bag, and walked through security toward whatever waited on the other side. Denver welcomed me with afternoon thunderstorms that cleared to reveal mountains so close they seemed unreal, like a painted backdrop rather than actual geology. The consulting firm, Rocky Mountain Education Partners, occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated warehouse in the Highlands district, all exposed brick and natural light and the kind of creative workspace that suggested people actually enjoyed being there. The interview panel consisted of 3 people: Marcus Webb, the founder and director, Caroline Stevens, who headed their legal and compliance division, and Nathan Carter, who would be my direct supervisor if hired. Marcus was in his 50s, black, with the kind of calm authority that came from genuine competence rather than performance. Caroline was sharp and observant, asking pointed questions about my research methodology. But it was Nathan who surprised me most. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 40s, with graying temples that somehow made him look distinguished rather than old. He wore jeans and a button-down shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, and when he smiled it reached his eyes in a way that suggested he didn't smile casually. He asked questions about my thesis work that demonstrated he'd actually read it, not just skimmed the abstract. Your research on how parental conflict manifests in classroom behavior is compelling, Nathan said, leaning forward slightly. But I'm curious about practical application. How do you translate academic findings into actionable strategies for teachers who are already overwhelmed? I'd prepared for technical questions about research design and theoretical frameworks. This question about real-world implementation caught me off guard in the best way. It suggested he cared about impact over credentials, about helping actual children rather than publishing impressive papers. I launched into an explanation about teacher training modules I developed during my internship, about creating simple assessment tools that didn't add to educator workload, about partnering with school counselors to identify at-risk students before crises occurred. Nathan nodded throughout, occasionally jotting notes, his expression engaged and thoughtful. The interview stretched past the scheduled hour as we discussed program design and community partnerships and the challenges of implementing trauma-informed practices in underfunded schools. I forgot to be nervous, lost in the kind of professional conversation I'd been starving for without realizing it. "We'll be in touch within the week," Marcus said as we concluded, shaking my hand with a grip that felt like a promise. "But between us, Lauren, you're exactly what we've been looking for. Someone who understands both the research and the reality." I left the building walking on air, giddy with possibility and the unfamiliar sensation of being genuinely valued for my expertise. Denver's downtown bustled with people finishing their workday, the mountains looming purple in the distance as the sun angled toward evening. I wandered through Lodo, the lower downtown historic district, discovering coffee shops and bookstores and a vibrant energy that felt nothing like Portland's rainy introspection. That night in my hotel room, I called Sophie to report on the interview. She listened with the serious attention she developed lately, asking surprisingly mature questions about the job responsibilities and whether I'd liked the people. "Mom," she said when I finished. "You sound happy. Like really happy, not just okay happy." Her observation startled me into recognizing its truth. I was happy, genuinely excited about possibilities rather than simply managing anxieties. When had that happened? When had I stopped just surviving and started actually anticipating good things? The job offer came 4 days later via email from Marcus, followed by a phone call from Nathan to discuss specifics. The salary was more than I'd dared hope for, enough to actually save money after expenses rather than constantly scrambling to cover basics. They'd help with relocation costs and give me a month to move before my start date in September. "I'm really looking forward to working with you," Nathan said toward the end of our call, his tone warm and sincere. "Your perspective is going to strengthen our program significantly." After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, at the email confirming the offer, at the sudden reality that I was leaving Portland and everything familiar to build something entirely new. Terror and exhilaration competed for dominance in my chest. Bridget arrived within an hour of my text, showing up with champagne and takeout Chinese food. We sat on my apartment floor surrounded by moving boxes I'd optimistically started packing, toasting to new beginnings and the courage to choose them. "You're going to do amazing things in Denver," Bridget said, her eyes suspiciously bright. "But I'm going to miss you terribly, you selfish jerk." I laughed through my own threatening tears. "You'll visit. We'll have mountain adventures and you can judge all my Colorado lifestyle choices." The logistics of moving consumed the next month. Finding housing in Denver from Portland proved challenging until Nathan, hearing about my struggles during a new employee orientation call, offered to scout apartments on my behalf. He sent video tours of rentals in neighborhoods with good schools, noting proximity to grocery stores and parks and his own assessment of the areas. His help felt generous without being intrusive, professional yet genuinely kind. We'd started having weekly check-in calls ostensibly about my onboarding process, but that often drifted into conversations about Denver's culture and the best hiking trails and his own experience moving there 5 years earlier after leaving a corporate consulting job in Chicago. There was something easy about talking to Nathan, a lack of performance or agenda that reminded me how exhausting my marriage had been with its constant navigation of Derek's moods and expectations. Nathan asked questions and actually listened to answers, shared information without mansplaining, admitted uncertainty when he didn't know something rather than bluffing through with false confidence. By the time I loaded a rental truck with our belongings in late August, I felt like I was driving towards something rather than fleeing from something, though elements of both were probably true. Sophie sat in the passenger seat as we pulled away from our Portland apartment, watching the city recede in the side mirror. Think you'll miss it? I asked as we merged onto the interstate heading east. Some things, she said thoughtfully. But mostly I think I'll miss who we used to be, not where we were. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, I assured her, reaching over to squeeze her hand. We get to figure out who we're becoming now. The drive to Denver took 2 days with an overnight stop in Boise where we stayed in a budget motel and ate gas station sandwiches and watched bad television like it was an adventure. Sophie seemed lighter somehow, as though physical distance from Portland was already lifting invisible weights. Denver appeared first as a brown smudge on the horizon, then gradually resolved into an actual city backed by mountains that seemed impossibly close and dramatic. We arrived on a Saturday afternoon in early September, the sky that deep blue that only exists at high altitude, the air thin and dry compared to Portland's humidity. Our new apartment was in the Highlands district, a neighborhood Nathan had recommended for its walkability and strong sense of community. It was a second-floor unit in a renovated historic building, hardwood floors and big windows and a small balcony that faced west toward the mountains. Nothing fancy, but clean and bright and entirely ours without the ghost of Derek's presence haunting every corner. We spent the weekend unpacking and exploring our new neighborhood. The coffee shop 2 blocks away became our default breakfast spot. The bookstore on the corner had a children's section where Sophie discovered a book club for teens. The park across the street hosted a farmer's market on Sunday mornings where we bought fresh produce and homemade salsa from vendors who welcomed us like we'd always been there. Nathan texted Sunday evening to check if we'd arrived safely and needed anything. His offer felt genuine rather than perfunctory, the kind of colleague who actually meant it when he said he was available to help. I assured him we were settling in fine, that I'd see him at the office Monday morning, that I was equal parts excited and nervous about starting. The nerves are good, he texted back. Means you care about doing it right. You're going to be great, Lauren. Trust yourself. His confidence in me felt both reassuring and slightly foreign. I wasn't accustomed to professional relationships built on mutual respect rather than complicated power dynamics and subtle dismissals. Monday morning arrived with that particular anxiety that accompanies first days, the fear of not belonging or being somehow revealed as a fraud who'd fooled people during interviews but couldn't actually perform the work. I dressed carefully in professional clothes that projected competence, dropped Sophie at her new school where she looked small and nervous among unfamiliar faces, then drove to the office with my stomach doing acrobatics. The Rocky Mountain Education Partners office was already bustling when I arrived at 8:30, people moving between conference rooms and cubicles with the purposeful energy of meaningful work underway. Nathan met me in the lobby, greeting me with a warm smile and a fresh cup of coffee that he somehow knew I took with just cream. Ready for the grand tour? He asked, gesturing for me to follow him through the workspace. His enthusiasm was infectious as he introduced me to colleagues and explained ongoing projects and showed me my own office, a small room with a window facing the mountains and a desk that was mine alone. The team Nathan supervised consisted of 7 people working on various educational initiatives, all of them welcoming and genuinely interested in my research background. There was an ease to the office culture, a sense that people enjoyed their work and each other, that felt nothing like the competitive tension of Derek's corporate environment. My first week involved orientation meetings and system training and beginning to review current programs for areas where my expertise might enhance effectiveness. Nathan checked in daily without hovering, offering guidance while trusting me to figure things out, creating the kind of supportive structure I'd craved during my marriage without ever finding. By Friday I felt simultaneously exhausted and energized, my brain full of new information and possibilities. Nathan stopped by my office at the end of the day to see how I was managing. Surviving? He asked, leaning against the doorframe with that easy posture of someone comfortable in his own skin. Thriving, actually, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. This week has been incredible. Thank you for taking a chance on someone without extensive field experience. Nathan shook his head slightly. Lauren, you have extensive experience. Just because it wasn't in a traditional professional setting doesn't make it less valuable. The way you understand family dynamics and child development comes from real life, not just textbooks. That's rare and important. His words echoed what Dr. Park had told me, This idea that my years as a mother and my navigation of divorce and my personal struggles weren't liabilities to overcome but assets that informed my professional perspective. I was still learning to believe it. Sophie's adjustment to Denver proved more challenging than mine initially. Her new school was larger and less familiar, the social dynamics of 8th grade made more complicated by arriving mid-year when friend groups had already solidified. She came home those first weeks quiet and withdrawn, doing homework with grim determination but offering little about her day. I worried I'd made a selfish choice, prioritizing my career opportunity over her stability. Then one evening about 3 weeks after our move, Sophie emerged from her room to find me making dinner and announced she'd joined the school's environmental club and made a friend named Zoe who also liked hiking. "We're planning a trail day next weekend if that's okay," Sophie said, her tone casual but her eyes hopeful. "Zoe's mom is organizing it. She seems nice." Relief flooded through me, warm and overwhelming. "Of course that's okay," I managed, stirring pasta with unnecessary focus to hide how close I was to crying. "I'd love to meet Zoe and her mom." The weekend hike happened at Mount Falcon Park, a network of trails west of Denver with views that seemed to stretch forever. Zoe turned out to be a confident girl with bright purple streaks in her hair and an infectious laugh. Her mother, Maria, was a divorced nurse who'd moved to Denver 5 years earlier for many of the same reasons I had: fresh start, better opportunities, distance from difficult ex-husband dynamics. Maria and I bonded immediately over coffee at the trailhead while the girls scrambled up rocky paths ahead of us, discovering that we shared remarkably similar histories of being underestimated and rebuilding ourselves into stronger versions. "You did the brave thing," Maria said as we hiked, her tone matter-of-fact. "Leaving is always harder than staying, even when staying is slowly killing you." Her blunt assessment of my Portland life felt validating in ways I hadn't expected. I'd second-guessed the move constantly those first weeks, wondering if I'd been running away rather than moving towards something. Maria's perspective reframed it as courage rather than fear. Work became increasingly engaging as I settled into projects. Nathan assigned me to revamp training modules for teachers working with students from high-conflict home situations, exactly the kind of work that drew on both my research and lived experience. We collaborated closely, spending hours in conference rooms mapping out curriculum improvements and arguing productively about pedagogical approaches. He challenged my ideas but never dismissed them, pushed me to think more deeply but never made me feel stupid for initial suggestions that needed refinement. Working with Nathan felt like partnership in ways my marriage never had, a balance of complementary strengths rather than one person diminishing the other to feel superior. Our professional relationship gradually expanded to include occasional lunches at the taqueria down the street, conversations that started about work but drifted into personal territory. Nathan shared about his own divorce 3 years prior, a marriage that had ended when his ex-wife accepted a job in Boston and he chose to stay in Denver where he'd built a life he loved. "It hurt terribly at the time," he admitted one afternoon over carnitas tacos. "But looking back, we'd grown into different people with incompatible priorities. Sometimes love isn't enough if you're fundamentally moving in opposite directions." His honesty about his own failure and healing felt safe, an acknowledgement that we all carried complicated histories without needing to present polished versions of ourselves. I found myself sharing more than I intended about Derek, about the recording that had played in court, about the years of subtle erosion that had made me question my own competence. "He was wrong about you," Nathan said quietly when I finished, his eyes serious. "You know that, right? Not just factually wrong, but wrong in a way that revealed his limitations, not yours." "I'm learning to believe that," I said. "Some days it feels true. Other days I still hear his voice telling me I'm not smart enough or capable enough." Nathan nodded understanding. "Those voices take time to quiet. But they do get quieter, I promise. Especially when you surround yourself with people who see you clearly." His words settled into me like seeds that would need time to grow. I wanted to believe them completely, wanted to trust that Derek's assessment had been projection rather than reality. But decades of conditioning couldn't be undone in months of new experiences, no matter how positive. Sophie's relationship with Derek continued its pattern of inconsistency and disappointment. He called irregularly, canceled virtual visits because of work demands, sent child support payments late despite the court order requiring timeliness. The distance between Denver and Portland made in-person visits more complicated logistically, requiring plane tickets and coordination that Derek seemed perpetually too busy to arrange. By October, Sophie had stopped asking when she'd see her father next, had stopped defending his absences with explanations about how busy he was. The transition from hope to resignation broke my heart even as I recognized it as necessary grief. One evening I found her crying in her room over a school project about family trees that required listing important people in your life. She'd written my name, Bridget's name, and then stopped, her pencil hovering over the space where Derek should logically appear. "I don't know what to put," she whispered when I sat beside her. "He's my dad, but he's not really important in my life anymore, is he? Is that okay to feel?" I pulled her close, this girl who was learning too young that biology didn't guarantee meaningful connection. "It's absolutely okay to feel exactly what you feel, sweetheart. Love and importance aren't the same as DNA. The people who show up consistently, who make you feel valued, those are the people who matter most." "Can I put Zoe's name?" Sophie asked. "And maybe Nathan? He helped us move and he's always asking how I'm doing when I see him at your office." Her question surprised me, though it probably shouldn't have. Nathan had indeed been present in ways that mattered, remembering details about Sophie's life and asking genuine questions when we encountered each other. He'd attended her school's open house when parents were invited to tour, standing in for the father who had scheduling conflicts. Small gestures that added up to consistent care. "Of course you can," I assured Sophie. "Family is who we choose as much as who we're related to." Nathan's presence in our lives had indeed expanded beyond professional boundaries into something that felt like friendship, though increasingly I found myself aware of him in ways that suggested my feelings were shifting into complicated territory. The way he laughed at my jokes, the casual touch of his hand on my arm during conversations, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at me, all of it registered in ways that both excited and terrified me. I wasn't ready for romantic complications. My divorce was barely 2 years old, my life still being actively rebuilt, my heart still learning to trust again. The last thing I needed was to develop feelings for my supervisor at the job that represented my fresh start and independence. So I did what any rational person would do. I ignored the attraction and focused aggressively on work and parenting and settling into Denver life. I told myself Nathan was simply kind to everyone, that his attention wasn't special, that I was misreading professional respect as personal interest because I was lonely and vulnerable. The strategy worked well enough until the company holiday party in mid-December, held at a brewery in Reno with craft beer and local food trucks and string lights creating a festive atmosphere. I debated attending, uncomfortable with social events where I was still the relatively new person, but Maria had convinced me it would be good networking and Sophie was spending the evening at Zoe's house anyway. Nathan found me early in the evening as I stood near the food trucks trying to decide between tacos and barbecue, looking effortlessly attractive in dark jeans and a navy sweater that made his eyes seem especially blue. "You came," he said, smiling with what looked like genuine pleasure. "I wasn't sure you would." Maria threatened bodily harm if I bailed, I admitted. "Apparently I need to get out more." "She's probably right," Nathan agreed. "Though I understand the impulse to hibernate. First year in a new city is exhausting." We filled plates with food and found a high-top table slightly removed from the main crowd where conversation was possible without shouting. The beer was excellent, the food better, and Nathan's company easy in ways that made me forget to be guarded. "How's Sophie adjusting?" he asked, genuine interest in his tone. "Last time you mentioned she was struggling with some social dynamics at school." "Better, actually. She found her people in the environmental club. Turns out hiking and tree planting attracts the kind of kids she connects with." I paused, then added, "She put you on her family tree project. Listed you as someone important in her life." Nathan's expression softened into something that looked like surprised pleasure. "That's really touching. She's a great kid, Lauren. You've done an amazing job with her, especially considering everything you've both been through." His acknowledgement of my parenting, offered without qualification or suggestion that I could have done better, hit me unexpectedly hard. Derek had constantly critiqued my mothering, suggesting Sophie would benefit from more structure or discipline or whatever flavor of inadequacy he'd decided I embodied that week. "Thank you," I managed, fighting the tightness in my throat. That means more than you probably realize. The evening unfolded with easy conversation and comfortable silences, the noise of the party fading into background as we talked about work in Denver and our respective divorces and the strange process of rebuilding lives we'd thought were permanent. Nathan shared about his relationship with his 15-year-old son who lived in Boston with his ex-wife, the pain of being a long-distance father who maintained connection through video calls and holiday visits. I miss huge chunks of his life, Nathan said quietly, his usual optimism faltering slightly. The daily stuff that makes up actual parenting. I send money and try to stay involved, but I'm basically a visitor in his life now. His vulnerability about his own perceived failures as a parent created space for me to share my guilt about uprooting Sophie, about choosing my career opportunity over proximity to her father even though Derek barely exercised his visitation rights anyway. You gave Sophie a healthier environment, Nathan said firmly when I voiced these doubts. Sometimes the best parenting means removing kids from toxic dynamics, even when it's hard and people judge you for it. The party continued around us, but I barely noticed, too absorbed in conversation that felt significant in ways I wasn't quite ready to examine. At some point Nathan's hand had ended up near mine on the table, close enough that I could feel its warmth without actual contact, a proximity that felt charged with possibilities neither of us was naming. Lauren, Nathan said eventually, his voice carrying a quality I hadn't heard before. I need to tell you something, and I'm aware it might complicate things professionally. My heart started doing complicated things in my chest, anticipation and anxiety competing for dominance. I think you're remarkable, he continued, his eyes holding mine with an intensity that made looking away impossible. Not just as a colleague, though you're brilliant at your work. But as a person. The way you've rebuilt your life, the way you parent Sophie, the way you approach challenges with both pragmatism and hope. I find myself thinking about you constantly in ways that definitely aren't appropriate for a professional relationship. His honesty hung between us, brave and terrifying in everything I'd been trying not to acknowledge about my own feelings. I should have said something cautious about workplace policies and maintaining boundaries and not rushing into complications. Instead I heard myself say, I think about you too. More than I should. More than I know what to do with. Nathan smiled then, relieved and hopeful and a little uncertain. So what do we do about it? Nothing tonight, I said, though my hand had somehow moved to cover his. We're both slightly drunk and it's a work party and this deserves better than an impulsive decision we might regret. You're right, Nathan agreed, though he didn't pull his hand away. But maybe we could have dinner sometime? Actually discuss this when we're sober and thinking clearly? I'd like that, I admitted, allowing myself to feel the warmth of his hand under mine, the possibility of something good growing from honest connection rather than manipulation or need. The party wound down eventually. Nathan walked me to my car through Denver's cold December night, the mountains invisible in the darkness but their presence felt anyway. At my car we stood awkwardly, the evening's conversation hanging between us heavy with implications. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. I know that took courage. Thank you for not running away, Nathan countered with a slight smile. Though I would have understood if you had. I'm done running, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. If I've learned anything these past 2 years, it's that running doesn't solve problems. Facing them honestly does. Nathan nodded slowly. Then let's face this honestly. No games, no assumptions, just two people figuring out if there's something real here worth exploring carefully. Carefully, I agreed, though already I could feel myself hoping for more than careful exploration, for the kind of connection that felt like coming home rather than performing for approval. I drove back to my apartment through empty streets, my mind buzzing with possibilities and concerns. Dating my supervisor was objectively complicated from an HR perspective. Getting involved with anyone while my life was still actively being reconstructed risked derailing the independence I'd worked so hard to build. Sophie needed stability, not her mother diving into a new relationship before fully healing from the last one. All the rational concerns lined up like soldiers guarding against hope. Yet underneath them thrummed something that felt like readiness, like I'd done enough work on myself to approach connection from wholeness rather than need, to choose someone based on compatibility rather than rescue. The next week Nathan and I navigated work with careful professionalism, acknowledging the shift between us without letting it interfere with collaboration. We scheduled dinner for the following Saturday at a restaurant neither of us had been to before, neutral territory for a conversation that deserved full attention. Sophie was spending the weekend with Maria and Zoe at Maria's mountain cabin, giving me rare time alone without parenting responsibilities. I changed clothes 3 times before settling on jeans and a soft sweater, wanting to look nice without appearing like I'd tried too hard, then laughed at myself for caring so much about a man's perception when I'd sworn off such concerns. But this felt different from performing for Derek's approval. This felt like wanting to show up authentically while looking like the best version of myself, a subtle but profound distinction. Nathan arrived at my apartment to pick me up, a gesture that felt old-fashioned and thoughtful in the era of meeting at locations. He dressed similarly casual, and when his eyes lit up seeing me, I felt genuinely beautiful rather than critically assessed. The restaurant was a small Italian place in Capitol Hill, intimate without being romantic, busy enough that we weren't conspicuous but quiet enough for a real conversation. We ordered wine and pasta and then sat looking at each other across candlelight, the weight of everything unsaid pressing against attempts at small talk. "I think we should probably address the elephant," Nathan said finally. "The professional complications of this." I'd researched company policy, I admitted. There's nothing specifically prohibiting relationships between colleagues, but given our supervisory dynamic, we'd need to disclose it to HR and possibly adjust reporting structures. "Are you comfortable with that?" Nathan asked. "Making our personal lives public to the company?" The question forced me to examine my own readiness. Part of me wanted to keep things private, protect this fragile possibility from scrutiny and judgment. But another part, the part that had learned painful lessons about hidden relationships and unspoken truths, knew that secrecy corroded trust and authenticity. "If we're doing this, we do it honestly," I said. "That means being transparent, even when it's uncomfortable." Nathan reached across the table, taking my hand in a gesture that felt significant and tender. "I really want to do this, Lauren. But only if you're sure. I won't be the reason you compromise your professional credibility or independence." His concern for my autonomy, his willingness to prioritize my career over his romantic interest, felt so profoundly different from Derek's constant undermining that emotion tightened my throat. "I want this too," I said, squeezing his hand. "I'm terrified and uncertain and definitely not ready to rush into anything serious. But I want to explore this carefully and see where it goes." "Then that's what we'll do," Nathan agreed. Carefully and honestly, with both of us checking in regularly to make sure we're still on solid ground. The dinner that followed felt like shedding layers of performance and protection, revealing ourselves to each other with a vulnerability that should have been frightening but instead felt like relief. Nathan talked about his failed marriage with honesty about his own contributions to its dissolution. I shared about Derek's betrayal without casting myself as purely victim. We acknowledged our wounds while refusing to let them define us or predetermine our possibilities. By the time Nathan drove me home hours later, something had shifted fundamentally. We were no longer just colleagues navigating attraction but 2 people actively choosing to build something together with intention and care. He walked me to my apartment door, the Denver night cold and clear above us, stars visible despite city lights. At the door we stood close enough to kiss but didn't, both of us recognizing that this moment deserved its own significance without rushing toward physical intimacy. "I'll see you Monday," Nathan said softly, his hand gentle against my face. "And I'll formally request a meeting with HR to discuss adjusting our reporting structure so we can do this right." "Thank you," I whispered, leaning slightly into his touch. "For being patient and careful and genuinely good." He smiled, something warm and promising in his expression. "Thank you for taking a chance on me. On us." After he left I stood in my quiet apartment, my heart full of possibilities I'd thought were permanently foreclosed. The journey from devastation to this moment had been long and difficult, paved with small choices to believe in my own worth despite constant messages to the contrary. I texted Sophie at Maria's cabin, just checking in but really wanting to share something of this momentous evening. She responded immediately with a string of emojis that suggested Maria's daughters had been teaching her the full range of digital expression, followed by a simple message that made me smile. "Happy looks good on you, Mom." You deserve it. Looking around my Denver apartment, at the life I'd built from fragments of a broken marriage, I let myself believe her. Maybe I did deserve happiness. Maybe careful hope wasn't the same as foolish optimism. Maybe learning from past mistakes meant being willing to risk new possibilities rather than walling off entirely. The recording of Derek's cruel words no longer played on repeat in my mind. His voice had been replaced gradually by other voices: Dr. Park's encouragement, the judge's validation, Sophie's pride, Nathan's respect, and increasingly my own recognition that intelligence and worth weren't measured by one person's narrow assessment. I had been stupid, perhaps, to stay in a marriage that diminished me for so long. But I'd been remarkably intelligent about everything since, choosing education over bitterness, moving toward opportunity rather than remaining stuck in familiar misery, building genuine connections based on mutual respect rather than need or manipulation. The transformation wasn't complete. Healing never moved in straight lines toward definitive endings. But standing in my Denver apartment on a cold December night, full of good food and wine and the memory of Nathan's hand on my face, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, becoming exactly who I was meant to become, surrounded by people who saw me clearly and chose me anyway. The future stretched ahead uncertain and full of possibilities. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, more days when Derek's old assessments echoed despite my best efforts to silence them. But there would also be this: work that mattered, a daughter who was thriving, friends who offered genuine support, and now potentially a partner who approached love as collaboration rather than competition. I went to bed that night with a lightness I'd almost forgotten was possible, grateful for the journey that had brought me here and curious about where it might lead next. The HR meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in January, both Nathan and I sitting across from Marcus Webb and the company's human resources director, a thoughtful woman named Patricia Simmons. The conversation was professional and surprisingly straightforward, lacking the judgment or complications I'd been anticipating. "We appreciate your transparency," Marcus said after we explained the situation. "This kind of honesty is exactly the culture we're trying to build here. Patricia will work with you both to adjust reporting structures so there's no direct supervisory relationship, and will document everything appropriately." Patricia nodded, already making notes on her tablet. "Nathan, you'll continue overseeing the broader education initiatives team, but Lauren's projects will report through Caroline Stevens in the legal and compliance division. She's been wanting more involvement in program development anyway, so this actually solves multiple organizational needs." The ease of the solution surprised me. I'd been prepared for resistance or complicated bureaucratic obstacles, had steeled myself against implications that my relationship was unprofessional or inappropriate. Instead, the company treated it as a logistical puzzle with practical solutions, valuing both our work and our right to personal connections. Walking out of that meeting, Nathan caught my hand briefly in the hallway, his relief evident. "That went better than I expected," he admitted quietly. "I was prepared to offer to transfer divisions if necessary." His willingness to make that sacrifice, to potentially disrupt his own career trajectory to protect mine, touched something deep. Derek would have expected me to be the one making accommodations, adjusting my professional life to suit his convenience. Nathan's first instinct had been to protect my opportunities, not his own. The shift in reporting structure happened seamlessly over the following weeks. Caroline Stevens proved to be an excellent supervisor, bringing legal precision to program development while appreciating creative approaches to complex problems. If anything, the change enhanced my work by connecting me more directly to compliance considerations that strengthened our educational initiatives. Nathan and I navigated the delicate balance of colleagues who were also dating with careful attention to boundaries. We didn't hide our relationship, but neither did we make workplace displays of affection or allow personal dynamics to interfere with professional collaboration. Coworkers who knew treated it as unremarkable, just two adults conducting themselves with appropriate maturity. Our actual dating progressed with the same thoughtful care we'd promised each other. Dinners at restaurants where we could talk for hours. Hikes in the foothills where conversation came easily between stretches of companionable silence. Movie nights at his place or mine, gradually becoming comfortable in each other's spaces. Nathan's condo was in Capitol Hill, a renovated brownstone with exposed brick and built-in bookshelves filled with an eclectic mix of education theory, historical fiction, and wilderness guides. His kitchen was actually stocked with real ingredients rather than takeout containers, and he cooked with casual competence that suggested genuine enjoyment rather than performance. "You're looking at my books," he observed one evening, finding me examining his shelves while he finished preparing dinner. "Judging my taste?" Impressed by the range, I corrected, pulling out a worn copy of a book on educational philosophy I'd read in graduate school. "And pleased that you actually read rather than just decorating with books." He laughed, stirring something that smelled incredible on the stove. "My ex-wife used to complain I read too much. Said I was more interested in books than people." "Were you?" I asked, genuinely curious about the relationship that had ended his marriage. Nathan considered the question seriously. "I think I was more interested in ideas than small talk, which she experienced as disinterest in her." Fair criticism, honestly. I've learned to be more present since then. His willingness to acknowledge his own failures in past relationships, to own his contributions to his divorce without making himself either villain or victim, felt refreshingly mature. We were both carrying histories of relationship failures, but neither of us was letting those histories poison new possibilities. Sophie met Nathan officially as my boyfriend rather than my supervisor on a Saturday in late February when he joined us for a hike at Red Rocks Park. I'd been nervous about the meeting, aware that 13-year-olds could be intensely protective of their mothers and skeptical of new partners. But Sophie and Nathan fell into easy conversation about environmental science and the best Colorado hiking trails, finding common ground quickly. "Mom says you help organize programs for kids dealing with divorce," Sophie said as we climbed the trail between dramatic red rock formations. "Does that actually help? Like, can programs really make it less terrible?" Nathan didn't give her a patronizing response or empty reassurance. "They can't make it not terrible," he admitted honestly. "Divorce is hard on kids no matter what. But good programs can help you understand it's not your fault, give you tools for managing difficult emotions, connect you with other kids going through similar things so you feel less alone." "Did you do programs like that?" Sophie asked. "When your parents divorced?" Nathan shook his head. "My parents are still married, actually. But my own divorce meant becoming a long-distance dad to my son, and I saw how much he struggled without adequate support. That's part of why I do this work now. Trying to make resources available that weren't there for him." His honesty with Sophie, treating her as capable of understanding complex emotions rather than someone to be protected from reality, impressed me. By the time we finished the hike and stopped for lunch at a nearby cafe, Sophie was chatting with Nathan like they'd known each other for years. "I like him," Sophie announced later that evening as we made dinner together in our apartment. "He doesn't try too hard or act fake. And he actually listens instead of just waiting to talk." High praise from a teenager, I said, smiling at her assessment. "I like him too. Are you going to marry him?" She asked suddenly, the question catching me off guard with its directness. "We've only been dating a few months, sweetheart. Way too early to think about marriage." Sophie shrugged, returning her attention to chopping vegetables. "Okay. But if you did marry him, I wouldn't mind. Just so you know." Her blessing, offered casually while preparing dinner, meant more than she probably realized. Sophie's approval wasn't necessary for my relationship choices, but her comfort with Nathan's presence in our lives removed a layer of concern I'd been carrying. Work consumed increasing amounts of energy as spring arrived and our programs expanded. The teacher training modules I developed with Nathan's initial guidance were being piloted in 5 Denver area school districts, requiring site visits and adjustment based on real-world implementation. Caroline pushed me to present our findings at education conferences, positioning me as an expert rather than simply support staff. The first conference presentation terrified me. Standing before a room of educators and administrators, I fought waves of imposter syndrome that whispered Derek's old assessment about my inadequacy. Then I looked at my presentation slides, at the data showing measurable improvements in classroom management and student engagement, at the testimonials from teachers who'd found the training genuinely helpful, and something steadied inside me. This work was solid. My expertise was real. Derek's judgment had been wrong. The presentation went well, judging by the questions afterward and the educators who approached me during breaks to discuss implementation in their own districts. Caroline, who'd attended to provide support, looked pleased as we left the conference center. "You're a natural at this," she said as we drove back to the office. "Have you thought about developing this into a broader consulting practice? You could be doing statewide or even national training instead of limiting yourself to Denver area programs." Her suggestion planted seeds that would grow over the following months. What if I could scale this work beyond Rocky Mountain Education Partners? What if the research and practical experience I'd built could reach more children navigating parental conflict? Nathan encouraged the idea when I mentioned it tentatively over dinner one evening. "You'd be amazing at independent consulting," he said immediately. "Though I'd miss working with you directly, I think you've outgrown what our firm can offer in terms of scope and impact." His support of my professional growth, even when it might mean less daily interaction, reinforced what I was learning about healthy partnerships. He wanted me to expand and succeed, not remain conveniently available to his needs and preferences. By summer I'd begun seriously exploring what independent consulting might look like. The logistics were daunting: establishing a business structure, managing finances, building a client base beyond the connections I'd made through Rocky Mountain Education Partners. But the possibility of creating something entirely mine, built on my expertise and vision, pulled at me with increasing insistence. Sophie finished 8th grade with solid grades and a confidence I hadn't seen in Portland. She'd found her place among the environmental club kids, had become close friends with Zoe and several other students who shared her interests. The distance from Derek had allowed her to develop an identity separate from trying to please him or manage his disappointment. Derek's involvement had dwindled to occasional phone calls and a week-long visit in June when Sophie flew to Portland. She returned from that visit quiet and thoughtful, eventually telling me that Derek and Vanessa were engaged and expecting a baby. "How do you feel about that?" I asked carefully, unsure whether she felt excited or displaced or some complicated combination. "Mostly nothing," Sophie admitted. "Like it's his life and doesn't really include me anymore." "Is that bad?" "It's honest," I said, pulling her into a hug. "You're allowed to feel however you feel about it. There's no wrong reaction." She nodded against my shoulder. "I think I'm mostly just sad that I don't feel sadder. Like I should care more about having a half-sibling or dad getting remarried. But it just feels like news about someone I used to know better." Her assessment, mature beyond her years, reflected a grief I understood intimately. Derek had chosen distance through his actions if not his words, had prioritized his new life over maintaining meaningful connection with his daughter. Sophie was simply recognizing and accepting what had already been true for months. Nathan and I celebrated our 6-month anniversary with a weekend trip to Glenwood Springs, soaking in hot springs pools surrounded by mountains and talking about futures that increasingly seemed to include each other. We'd fallen into comfortable rhythms of relationship, navigating disagreements with direct communication rather than manipulation, supporting each other's goals without scorekeeping or resentment. "I need to tell you something," Nathan said on our last evening there, as we sat on our hotel balcony watching the Colorado River flow past below. "My ex-wife is moving to Denver. She got a position at University of Colorado Hospital, and my son James will be starting high school here in the fall." The news landed with complicated weight. Nathan's face showed both joy and anxiety, clearly uncertain how I'd receive this information. "That's wonderful," I said, meaning it. "You'll get to be an active dad again instead of relying on video calls and holiday visits." "But it complicates things for us," Nathan continued. "James will need a lot of attention adjusting to a new city and school. And there will be coordination with my ex-wife that might be awkward or uncomfortable for you." I reached for his hand, understanding his concern but not sharing it. "Nathan, you being an involved father doesn't complicate anything. It's one of the things I value most about you, actually. The way you prioritize your son despite the difficulty of distance." Relief washed across his face. "I was worried you might feel like I was choosing him over you, or that the co-parenting dynamics would be too much drama." The echo of Derek's attitude toward parenting as inconvenient obligation struck me. Nathan saw being a father as central to his identity, not something that interfered with more important priorities. That fundamental difference in values made me certain of something I'd been circling around for months. I love you, I said, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. I love that you're a devoted father. I love your integrity and kindness and the way you approach challenges with both pragmatism and optimism. I love who I am when I'm with you. Nathan's eyes filled with emotion I'd rarely seen him display. I love you too, Lauren. I'd been wanting to say it for weeks but was waiting for the right moment. There is no perfect moment, I said, laughing slightly. There's just honesty when you're ready to be honest. We spent that night talking about futures in concrete rather than hypothetical terms. Nathan wanted to introduce me to James properly, as his girlfriend rather than just a colleague. I wanted Nathan to be more integrated into Sophie's life, not just occasional weekend activities but actual presence. We discussed what it might look like to eventually blend our families, acknowledging the complexities while believing in the possibilities. James arrived in Denver in mid-August, a tall 15-year-old who looked remarkably like his father and carried the defensive posture of a teenager being uprooted from familiar territory. Nathan's ex-wife, Catherine, was professional but cool when we met briefly during James's move-in to Nathan's condo. You're Lauren, she said, assessing me with the careful attention of someone evaluating potential impact on her child. Nathan's mentioned you. You work in education? Educational consulting, I confirmed, understanding the protective scrutiny. Primarily developing trauma-informed programs for students dealing with family transitions. Something in her expression shifted slightly, perhaps recognizing I understood complexities of divorce and blended families from professional and personal experience. James will need support adjusting to Denver, she said more warmly. His school in Boston was very different from what he'll find here. The implicit request for professional insight felt like an olive branch. I offered to connect her with resources at James's new school, to share research on supporting adolescent adjustment to major transitions. Catherine accepted gratefully, and some tension dissolved between us. James and Sophie met at a family barbecue Nathan and I hosted over Labor Day weekend at a park near my apartment. I'd been anxious about the meeting, aware that blending families required more than good intentions. But watching James teach Sophie how to throw a frisbee properly, both of them laughing as the disc went wildly off course repeatedly, I felt hope that maybe we could actually build something functional from our complicated pieces. Fall brought significant changes professionally. I'd been laying groundwork for independent consulting all summer, and in September I gave notice at Rocky Mountain Education Partners. Marcus and Caroline were supportive, even offering to hire me as an external consultant for ongoing projects. Nathan was proud despite admitting he'd miss our daily collaboration. Launching Hayes Educational Consulting felt simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. I'd secured 3 initial clients through conference connections, enough to justify the leap but not enough to guarantee stability. I converted our apartment's spare bedroom into an office, filed business licenses and tax forms, created a website that looked more professional than I felt. The first month operating independently tested every ounce of confidence I'd built. Without the structure of an organization behind me, I questioned whether anyone would take me seriously, whether clients would actually pay what my expertise was worth, whether I'd made a catastrophic mistake leaving stable employment. Then the first paycheck arrived from a school district where I'd conducted teacher training. Then a second client referred 3 others. Then a university contacted me about developing curriculum for their graduate education program. Gradually, the terror receded as evidence accumulated that I could actually sustain this venture. Nathan watched my business grow with genuine pride, celebrating contract signings and successful presentations with enthusiasm that never felt competitive or diminished by my success. His own work continued at Rocky Mountain Education Partners, his expertise in program development increasingly recognized regionally. We found rhythm as a couple managing demanding careers, supporting each other through stresses and celebrating victories. Some evenings we worked in companionable silence at his place or mine, Sophie doing homework at the table while Nathan and I reviewed presentations or drafted proposals. Other evenings we intentionally disconnected from work entirely, cooking elaborate meals together or taking the kids to concerts or simply watching terrible television and laughing at our own exhaustion. By Christmas we'd been together a year, navigating holidays that involved coordinating with ex-spouses and managing teenage emotions and building new traditions that honored both our families' histories. Catherine joined us for Christmas Eve dinner, an initially awkward arrangement that gradually relaxed as she realized Nathan and I weren't trying to erase her presence in James's life. Sophie asked me privately on Christmas morning whether Nathan and I were getting married. The question no longer felt premature given how integrated our lives had become. "We've talked about it," I admitted, watching her face for reactions. "How would you feel if we did?" "Good," she said simply. "He makes you happy. And James is like the brother I didn't know I wanted, even though he's annoying sometimes." Her blessing, offered more enthusiastically than her cautious approval a year earlier, settled something in my chest. I wasn't rushing into partnership as escape or rescue. I was choosing deliberately from a place of wholeness and self-knowledge, building something with someone who valued me as an equal partner. Nathan proposed on New Year's Eve at Red Rocks Amphitheater, the same park where Sophie had given her initial approval of our relationship. We'd hiked up to watch the sunset, Sophie and James trailing behind us, giving us space while staying close enough to witness whatever was about to happen. The proposal itself was perfectly Nathan, thoughtful, genuine, lacking unnecessary flourishes or performance. He talked about partnership and mutual respect and building a life together that honored both our individual dreams and shared goals. The ring was simple and beautiful, picked with Sophie's input according to what he told me later. I said yes without hesitation, certain in ways I'd never been with Derek that this choice was solid and true and built on real knowing rather than youthful optimism or social expectation. Sophie and James joined us then, both of them grinning with delight at having been included in the secret planning. We took terrible selfies in the fading light, the four of us crowded together with the Denver skyline visible in the distance, documenting the moment when we officially committed to becoming a blended family. The engagement period allowed us to navigate logistics thoughtfully rather than rushing toward a wedding date. We discussed where to live, eventually deciding to sell both our current places and buy a house together that would feel like home to everyone rather than one person's space that others were joining. We talked through finances and parenting philosophies and household management approaches, all the practical matters that could become sources of resentment if left unaddressed. Catherine's reaction to the engagement was complex but ultimately positive. She and Nathan had been divorced long enough that romantic jealousy wasn't a factor, but she worried naturally about James's adjustment and my role in his life. A series of honest conversations, including one where I explicitly stated I had no intention of trying to replace her as James's mother, eased her concerns. By spring we'd found a house in the Highlands neighborhood, a renovated Victorian with 4 bedrooms and a backyard large enough for a garden Sophie wanted to plant. The house needed work but had good bones and enough space for 2 teenagers who needed their own territories plus room for Nathan's home office and mine. My business continued expanding beyond what I'd imagined possible. I'd been invited to speak at national education conferences, had published articles in professional journals, had developed a reputation for practical, research-backed approaches to supporting students from high-conflict homes. The work felt meaningful in ways that transcended simply earning income, each program implementation potentially helping children navigate challenges I understood intimately. Nathan's pride in my success never wavered into jealousy or competition. He referred clients to me, celebrated my professional recognition, adjusted his own schedule to accommodate my travel for speaking engagements. The fundamental respect and support that characterized our relationship extended into every domain. Planning the wedding became a family project, all 4 of us contributing ideas about what would make the event meaningful rather than simply performative. We decided on a small ceremony at the Denver Botanic Gardens in late June, immediate family and close friends only, focused on genuine celebration rather than elaborate production. Derek's invitation arrived via email in May, a carefully worded note that acknowledged the distance between us but requested to attend Sophie's mother's wedding if I was comfortable with his presence. Sophie had mentioned the wedding during one of their infrequent phone calls, and Derek apparently felt obligated to express interest in attending. I discussed his request with Nathan, who left the decision entirely to me without pressure toward inclusion or exclusion. Sophie's input mattered more, and when I asked her directly, she thought about it seriously before answering. "I think I want him there," she said finally. "Not because we're close or because he's been a great dad. But because him seeing you happy and successful feels important somehow. Like proof that his opinions about you were wrong." Her reasoning surprised me with its perceptiveness. The temptation to exclude Derek from this celebration was strong, to deny him access to evidence of my thriving. But Sophie's desire to have her father present, even in a limited capacity, carried weight. I sent Derek a brief response confirming he was welcome to attend the ceremony if he wanted to make the trip from Portland. His acceptance came with unexpected additions. He'd bring Vanessa and their infant daughter. His mother would also attend to see Sophie. The response felt more about performing family obligations than genuine interest, but I decided that wasn't my concern to manage. The weeks before the wedding blurred together with house-moving logistics, work commitments, and endless details about flowers and catering and photography. Maria and Bridget, who'd flown in from Portland, took over much of the planning when I became overwhelmed, organizing everything with military efficiency while reminding me the actual marriage mattered more than the wedding details. Bridget's arrival brought emotional comfort I hadn't realized I needed. She'd been with me through the worst of my divorce, had believed in my worth when I couldn't, had celebrated every milestone of my rebuilding. Having her present for this moment felt like closing a circle. "You've come so far," she said the night before the wedding, as we sat on my soon-to-be former apartment's balcony drinking wine and looking at city lights. "I'm so proud of who you've become, Lauren. I couldn't have done it without you," I said honestly. "You kept telling me I was smart and capable when I'd forgotten how to believe it." "You did the actual work," Bridget corrected. "I just reminded you occasionally of what was always true." The wedding day arrived with perfect Colorado weather, sunny and mild with mountains visible in the distance. I dressed in my apartment one last time, Maria and Bridget helping with the simple cream-colored dress I'd chosen, both of them suspiciously teary despite protests that they never cried at weddings. Sophie came in while I was finishing getting ready, looking beautiful and mature in her carefully selected dress. "You look amazing, Mom," she said, then hesitated before adding, "I'm really happy for you." "For us." I pulled her into a careful hug, mindful of not crushing either of our outfits. "Thank you for being patient with all the changes, sweetheart. I know blending families is complicated." "It's worth it though," Sophie said. "Nathan's good. James is growing on me. And you're happier than I've ever seen you." Her assessment carried the weight of someone who'd witnessed my journey from devastated wife to independent woman to partner in a genuine equal relationship. She'd seen me at my lowest and now at something approaching my best, and her approval meant everything. The ceremony at the Botanic Gardens was intimate and meaningful, 30 people gathered among flowering plants and towering trees. Nathan stood with James beside him as best man, Sophie served as my maid of honor, and we exchanged vows we'd written ourselves that promised partnership and respect and continued growth together. Derek attended with his expanded family, sitting in the back row and looking uncomfortable in ways that might have bothered me once but now simply registered as his limitation, not mine. His mother hugged me warmly afterward, whispering that I looked radiant and she was genuinely happy for me. The reception was casual and joyful, held in the garden's event space with local food and a small band playing music we actually liked rather than traditional wedding fare. Nathan and I danced together awkwardly but happily, both of us laughing at our lack of coordination but not caring about the performance. At some point during the evening, Derek approached me where I stood talking with Maria and Bridget. He looked older than I remembered, tired despite his expensive suit and careful grooming. "Congratulations, Lauren," he said stiffly. "You seem very happy." "I am," I confirmed simply, not elaborating or seeking his approval. "I wanted to apologize," he continued, the words clearly difficult. "For how I treated you during our marriage. How I spoke about you to Sophie. That recording she made," he paused, clearly uncomfortable. "I was wrong. About a lot of things." His apology, years late and prompted perhaps by seeing my obvious success, should have felt vindicating. Instead I just felt tired of carrying any remaining weight of his judgment. "Thank you for saying that," I said genuinely. "I hope you and Vanessa are happy, Derek. I hope you're a better partner to her than you were to me, and a better father to your new daughter than you've been to Sophie lately." His face reddened slightly at the gentle rebuke, but he nodded acceptance. "Sophie deserves better from me. I'm trying to do better." "That's between you and Sophie," I said, not unkindly but firmly. "My concern is that she knows she's worthy of consistent love and presence, whether she gets that from you or not." Derek excused himself after a few more awkward pleasantries, returning to Vanessa and their baby with visible relief. Bridget watched him go with satisfaction. "That was perfectly handled," she said approvingly. "Gracious but honest. You've really learned to set boundaries." "I've had good teachers," I said, smiling at her and Maria. "And a lot of practice figuring out what I will and won't accept anymore." The evening wound down with toasts and laughter and dancing. Nathan's toast to me made several people cry with its genuine expression of love and respect. Sophie's toast was shorter but equally moving, thanking me for showing her what healthy partnership looked like and for having the courage to start over when staying would have been easier. As the reception ended and guests departed, Nathan and I stood together in the gardens looking at mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. We'd leave in the morning for a brief honeymoon in the San Juan Mountains, then return to the complex, beautiful reality of blended family life and demanding careers and all the ordinary challenges of daily existence. But in that moment, standing beside someone who chose me deliberately and continuously, who valued my intelligence and competence and dreams, I felt something profound and true settle into place. I had been told I was too stupid to help, too inadequate to deserve respect, too limited to achieve meaningful success. Every one of those assessments had been wrong, not because I'd transformed into someone different but because they'd never been accurate in the first place. The recording that had played in court years ago, Derek's voice dismissing me to our daughter, had served its purpose in securing legal protection and validation. But the real victory wasn't that moment of public vindication. It was this moment of private certainty, knowing my worth independent of anyone else's assessment or approval. I'd built a successful business from expertise Derek had dismissed. I'd raised a confident, compassionate daughter largely on my own. I'd found partnership that enhanced rather than diminished me. I'd created a life that felt authentic and meaningful and entirely mine. The journey from devastation to this moment had been long and difficult, paved with small choices to believe in myself despite constant messages to the contrary. But standing in the gardens on my wedding day, surrounded by people who genuinely loved and respected me, I understood something fundamental. Derek's cruelty hadn't defined me. It had simply revealed his limitations while eventually pushing me toward discovering my actual strength and capacity. The transformation wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about discovering I'd never needed his approval to be exactly who I was meant to become. Nathan's arm around my waist pulled me from reflection back to the present moment. "Ready to start our next adventure?" he asked softly. I leaned into him, feeling gratitude and hope and hard-won confidence. "More ready than I've ever been," I said truthfully. And I was. The honeymoon in the San Juan Mountains provided a brief escape from the beautiful chaos of blended family life, though both Nathan and I found ourselves texting the kids more frequently than probably appropriate for newlyweds. James sent photos of meals he'd cooked under Catherine's supervision, proud of his growing independence. Sophie shared updates about the gardens she and Maria's daughters were planting in our new backyard. Their messages felt less like interruptions and more like threads connecting us to the life we were building together. Returning to Denver meant settling into our new house in earnest, navigating the complex choreography of 4 people learning to share space with different habits and expectations. James needed loud music while doing homework, which drove Sophie crazy when she was trying to concentrate. Nathan left coffee cups in random locations throughout the house, a habit I found endearing until I discovered 3 days' worth accumulated in his office. Sophie monopolized the single upstairs bathroom for lengthy morning routines that made everyone else late. These small frictions could have become sources of resentment. Instead, Nathan and I approached them as puzzles requiring collaborative solutions rather than battles to be won. We instituted house meetings where everyone could voice concerns without judgment. We created systems that respected individual needs while maintaining household function. We learned that blending families meant constant negotiation and flexibility rather than imposing one family's culture on another. Catherine proved to be a reasonable co-parent once initial territorial concerns settled. She and I developed a functional relationship built on mutual respect for our different roles in James's life. When James struggled with the adjustment to his new school, Catherine and I coordinated with his teachers and counselors, sharing information and strategies without competing over who was the better parent. Nathan watched these interactions with visible relief, having feared his ex-wife and new wife might make his life miserable with conflict. My business continued expanding in ways that required difficult decisions about capacity and scope. By fall I'd hired my first employee, a recent graduate named Tanya who brought fresh energy and organizational skills that freed me to focus on program development and client relationships. The transition from solo operation to actual business with staff felt simultaneously empowering and terrifying, laden with new responsibilities and complexities. A breakthrough came in October when the Colorado Department of Education contacted me about developing statewide training protocols for trauma-informed education. The contract was substantial, both financially and in terms of professional recognition. It would require significant time and resources but would establish my work as the standard across Colorado's public school system. Nathan found me staring at the contract one evening, paralyzed between excitement and fear of overcommitting. "What's holding you back?" he asked, settling beside me on the couch where I'd been reviewing terms for the third time. "I'm terrified I'll fail," I admitted. "That I'll take on something this significant and prove I'm not actually capable of delivering at this level. That Derek was right about me all along." Nathan took my hands, his expression serious and certain. "Lauren, Derek was never right about you. Not once. He was a small person who needed you to be smaller so he could feel adequate. You've proven your capability repeatedly, and this opportunity exists because people who actually understand education recognize your expertise." His words helped, though the fear didn't entirely dissipate. I signed the contract the next day, committing Hayes Educational Consulting to work that would define Colorado's approach to supporting students from high-conflict homes for years to come. The weight of that responsibility felt enormous, but also deeply meaningful in ways that transcended simple professional achievement. The project consumed the better part of a year, requiring collaboration with education policy experts, school district administrators, mental health professionals, and practicing teachers. I traveled extensively throughout Colorado, visiting schools in rural communities and urban centers, learning about diverse challenges and resources. Tanya managed office operations while I was on the road, proving herself invaluable in ways that justified hiring additional support staff as the business continued growing. Sophie entered high school that fall, navigating freshman year with the same thoughtful maturity she developed over the past few years. She'd maintained her interest in environmental science, joining the high school's conservation club and volunteering with local organizations focused on sustainability. Watching her confidence and sense of purpose, I felt profound gratitude that we'd made the move to Denver despite initial uncertainties. Her relationship with Derek remained inconsistent and somewhat distant. He called occasionally, sent child support payments reliably after the court had established automatic withdrawals, and saw Sophie during a week each summer when she visited Portland. But the deep connection of an engaged father and daughter never materialized, replaced by a cordial but emotionally shallow relationship that Sophie seemed to accept without significant distress. "He's just my biological father," she explained matter-of-factly when I gently probed about her feelings. "Nathan's more of an actual dad in the ways that count. I'm okay with how things are with Derek." Her assessment stung on her behalf, grief for the father-daughter relationship she deserved but hadn't received. Yet I also recognized the health in her acceptance rather than perpetual hope for something Derek wasn't capable of providing. James graduated from high school that spring with plans to attend Colorado State University in Fort Collins, staying close enough for regular visits but far enough to establish independence. His relationship with Nathan had strengthened significantly over the past 2 years, evolving from awkward weekend visits to genuine closeness. Nathan's eyes filled with emotion during James's graduation ceremony, pride and bittersweetness at watching his son prepare to leave home mixing visibly on his face. The state education department project concluded successfully in early summer, with official rollout of the trauma-informed training protocol scheduled for the following school year. The achievement felt significant beyond my individual career advancement. Every teacher trained through these protocols would potentially help dozens of students navigate family conflict more successfully. The ripple effects could touch thousands of children, offering support I'd wished existed when Sophie and I were navigating the worst of my divorce. Recognition followed the project's completion. Education journals published articles about the Colorado model. National education organizations invited me to present at conferences. A publisher approached about turning my research and practical frameworks into a book for educators and mental health professionals. Each opportunity built on previous ones, creating momentum that felt both exhilarating and occasionally overwhelming. Nathan watched my success with unwavering support and genuine pride, never showing signs of feeling diminished by my growing professional profile. If anything, he seemed to draw satisfaction from my achievements, celebrating my wins with the same enthusiasm he brought to his own work successes. The book project became my focus through the following fall and winter, writing in early mornings and late evenings around client commitments and family responsibilities. The process proved simultaneously demanding and cathartic, synthesizing years of research and lived experience into frameworks that might help others navigate similar challenges. Nathan read early drafts, offering feedback that strengthened the work without trying to control or redirect it. By spring the manuscript was complete, sent to my publisher for editing and production. The book would release the following fall, timed to coincide with the new school year when educators would be most receptive to professional development resources. The thought of my name on a published book, my ideas in libraries and bookstores, felt surreal given where I'd been just 5 years earlier. "You need to celebrate this properly," Nathan insisted when I minimized the accomplishment, uncomfortable with calling attention to my success. "This is a major achievement, Lauren. Stop downplaying it." His insistence on recognizing my work as significant gradually helped me internalize that my accomplishments had real value independent of anyone else's validation or judgment. I'd spent so many years having my contributions dismissed that accepting genuine recognition still felt foreign and slightly uncomfortable. The celebration Nathan planned turned out to be more elaborate than I'd anticipated. He'd coordinated with my closest colleagues and friends to host a gathering at our house ostensibly for my birthday but actually focused on the book completion. Caroline Stevens and Marcus Webb from Rocky Mountain Education Partners attended, along with several other professional colleagues. Bridget flew in from Portland, Maria came with her daughters, and even Dr. Park made the trip from Portland to attend. The gathering was warm and genuine, full of people who'd supported my journey in various ways and who seemed genuinely excited about my success. Dr. Park pulled me aside at one point during the evening, her expression proud and emotional in ways she rarely displayed. "Do you remember our conversation at your graduation?" she asked. "When I told you to find out who you become when no one is watching with preconceptions?" I nodded, remembering that moment when leaving Portland had still felt terrifying and uncertain. "You've exceeded anything I imagined for you," she continued. "Not just professionally, though your work is outstanding. But the way you've built an authentic life aligned with your values, the way you parent Sophie with such thoughtfulness, the way you've created genuine partnership with Nathan. You've become exactly who you were meant to be." Her words touched something deep, validation from someone who'd believed in me when I'd struggled to believe in myself. "Thank you," I managed past the tightness in my throat. "For seeing possibilities I couldn't see yet." "That was always there, Lauren," Dr. Park said gently. "I just helped you remember to look." The evening wound down with toasts and laughter and the comfortable warmth of being surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. Sophie gave a brief speech about being proud of her mom, her words simple but sincere. Nathan's toast was longer, recounting our journey from professional colleagues to partners building a life together, his love and respect evident in every word. As guests departed and we cleaned up together, the four of us working in companionable coordination that had become our normal, I felt profound gratitude for the life we'd constructed. It wasn't perfect or without challenges, but it was real and true and built on foundations of mutual respect and genuine care. The book's publication date was set for September, with a launch event scheduled at the Tattered Cover Bookstore in Denver's Union Station. My publisher wanted to use the launch as an opportunity for media attention, positioning the book as a significant contribution to trauma-informed education rather than just another professional development resource. The prospect of public attention made me deeply uncomfortable. I'd built my career on competent work rather than self-promotion, uncomfortable with anything that felt like claiming expertise I still sometimes doubted I possessed. Nathan gently challenged my reticence during one of our evening walks through the neighborhood. "Why does claiming your expertise feel wrong?" he asked as we passed houses lit warmly against the summer evening. "You've done the research, developed programs that demonstrably help children, trained hundreds of educators. At what point do you accept that you actually are an expert?" His question forced me to examine the persistent voice in my head that still whispered Derek's assessments about my inadequacy. When had that voice become so internalized that I rejected recognition even from legitimate sources who valued my work? "I'm afraid of seeming arrogant," I admitted. Of claiming importance I haven't actually earned. There's a massive difference between arrogant self-promotion and acknowledging genuine achievement, Nathan countered. You're not claiming to be more than you are. You're finally accepting that you are exactly what years of hard work and dedication have made you, a recognized expert whose work matters. His perspective helped shift something in my thinking. Accepting recognition wasn't arrogance. It was honesty about the value I'd created through sustained effort and genuine expertise. Refusing recognition out of false modesty actually dishonored the work itself and potentially limited its impact. The months leading up to the book launch involved publicity activities I'd never imagined doing, podcast interviews about trauma-informed education, media training to prepare for television appearances, photo shoots for promotional materials. Each activity felt slightly surreal, as though I was playing a role rather than simply being myself. Then I'd receive an email from an educator who'd attended one of my trainings, describing how the strategies had helped a struggling student. Or I'd visit a school implementing the Colorado protocols and see teachers confidently applying approaches I'd developed. These concrete reminders of actual impact grounded the more abstract professional recognition. A significant opportunity emerged in August when a national morning show contacted my publisher about featuring the book during a segment on supporting children through divorce. The producer wanted me to appear as an expert guest, discussing both my research and my personal experience navigating high-conflict divorce as a parent. The invitation triggered complicated emotions. Sharing my story publicly meant potentially reopening wounds I'd worked hard to heal. It meant Derek and people from my Portland life seeing me discuss our divorce on national television. It meant vulnerability in ways that felt risky despite years of professional success. You don't have to do it, Nathan said when I shared my hesitation. Your book will succeed regardless of one television appearance. Don't sacrifice your privacy if it doesn't feel right. But Sophie surprised me with her perspective when I mentioned the opportunity during dinner. I think you should do it, Mom, she said thoughtfully. There are probably a lot of people who need to hear that you can rebuild after everything falls apart. That being dismissed doesn't make you actually less capable or valuable. Her insight pierced something essential. This wasn't about me proving anything to Derek or vindicating myself publicly. It was about using my platform to offer hope and practical guidance to others navigating similar devastation. If sharing my story could help even a handful of people recognize their own worth and possibility, the discomfort was worthwhile. I accepted the invitation, agreeing to film the segment in late September, shortly after the book's official release. The decision felt terrifying and right in equal measure. The book launch event exceeded my expectations in every way. The tattered cover had set up in their main event space, rows of chairs that filled rapidly as people arrived. Professional colleagues attended, along with friends and family. Catherine came to support the achievement of her son's stepmother, a gesture of respect that touched me deeply. Even some of the teachers I'd trained drove in from rural communities to attend. I stood before the audience feeling waves of imposter syndrome that whispered I didn't deserve this attention, that any moment someone would recognize I was fraudulent. Then I saw Sophie in the front row, her face proud and certain, and something steadied inside me. The presentation I'd prepared covered the book's main frameworks, but I opened with personal context about why this work mattered to me beyond academic interest. I spoke briefly about my divorce, about hearing my daughter's recording of her father dismissing my intelligence, about the long journey of rebuilding both professional credibility and personal confidence. Sharing that vulnerability with a room full of strangers should have felt exposing and shameful. Instead it felt liberating, a final release of the shame I'd carried about my marriage's failure and Derek's dismissal. His judgment no longer held power over me. I'd done the work of proving him wrong not through vindictive success but through genuine growth and meaningful contribution. The question and answer period following the presentation revealed how many people connected with my story. Teachers shared about students they were trying to help. Parents described their own struggles with high-conflict co-parenting. Graduate students asked about research methodology and career paths in educational consulting. Each question reinforced that my work resonated beyond abstract professional development into actual human struggles and needs. Book sales were brisk, people lining up for signed copies and brief conversations. I signed books for over an hour, personalizing messages and hearing snippets of stories from people who saw themselves in my journey. The experience was humbling and energizing, concrete evidence that vulnerability in service of helping others was worth the discomfort. Nathan found me afterward as the bookstore staff was cleaning up, looking tired but happy. "That was incredible," he said, pulling me into an embrace. "You were incredible. So honest and clear and genuinely helpful. I think I'm finally starting to believe I actually know what I'm doing," I admitted against his shoulder. "That maybe I've earned the recognition." "You've more than earned it," he confirmed. "And watching you accept it gracefully instead of deflecting is beautiful to see." The national television appearance happened 2 weeks later in New York, requiring a quick trip that Nathan joined me on for moral support. The actual taping lasted only about 12 minutes, a brief segment during the show's second hour that felt simultaneously rushed and interminable. The host asked competent questions about supporting children through parental conflict, allowing me to share key frameworks from the book while briefly referencing my own experience. What I didn't expect was the response. Within hours of the segment airing, my publisher reported a surge in book orders. My professional email filled with messages from viewers who'd connected with my story. Social media mentions proliferated, most of them positive, though a few criticized my decision to discuss my divorce publicly. One message stood out among the hundreds. It came from a woman in Ohio who'd been told by her ex-husband that she was too emotional and irrational to make sound decisions about their children's education. She doubted herself for years, second-guessing every parenting choice and accepting his dismissive assessments. Watching me discuss similar experiences while clearly thriving professionally and personally had given her permission to question his narrative and trust her own judgment. "Your story reminded me that one person's opinion, even someone I was married to, doesn't define my actual capabilities," she wrote. "Thank you for being brave enough to share your journey." Her message, and dozens of similar ones, confirmed that the discomfort of public vulnerability had been worthwhile. My story wasn't unique or special, but sharing it openly created permission for others to recognize their own worth independent of dismissive judgments from people who should have supported them. The book climbed education bestseller lists through the fall, attracting attention from school districts across the country interested in implementing similar trauma-informed protocols. Hayes Educational Consulting expanded again, requiring additional staff and larger office space to manage growing demand. What had started as a tentative solo venture had become a recognized firm with regional influence and growing national profile. Media requests continued through the fall and winter, each one requiring decisions about which opportunities aligned with my goals versus which simply fed ego or distraction. I accepted invitations that focused on the work itself and declined those that seemed primarily interested in personal drama or inspirational narratives without substance. A particularly significant invitation came in December from a national education conference scheduled for the following spring in Chicago. The organizers wanted me as a keynote speaker, addressing several thousand educators about trauma-informed approaches. The honor was substantial, the kind of recognition that established credibility at the highest levels of the field. The invitation also included an interesting detail. The conference would feature a panel discussion on educational innovation, bringing together leaders from various organizations working to reform approaches to student well-being. One of the confirmed panelists was Derek's firm, which apparently had a consulting division focused on educational facility design and organizational efficiency. I stared at the email, processing the information that Derek and I would potentially be at the same professional conference, possibly interacting in public professional contexts. The coincidence felt loaded with symbolic weight, though rationally I knew Chicago was a major conference city and Derek's firm's involvement wasn't actually about me. Nathan read the invitation over my shoulder, immediately understanding the complexity. "Are you okay with that?" he asked carefully. Knowing he might be there? I considered the question seriously, examining my emotional response. Years earlier, the prospect of seeing Derek in any context would have triggered anxiety and dread, fear that his presence would undermine my confidence or dredge up painful history. Now I felt mostly curious, interested in observing who he'd become and how we'd navigate interaction from our vastly different positions. "I'm okay with it," I said slowly. "Actually, I think it might be good. A chance to see clearly that we're simply two people who used to be married and now live completely separate lives that occasionally intersect professionally." Nathan nodded understanding, though concern lingered in his expression. "Just remember you don't owe him anything." Not explanation, not friendly catching up, not access to your life or success. You get to set whatever boundaries feel comfortable. His support without trying to control my choices reinforced what I'd learned about healthy partnership. He trusted me to navigate complex situations while offering unconditional support regardless of what I decided. Derek had always tried to manage my interactions and decisions, assuming I couldn't be trusted to handle things competently. Nathan's approach was the opposite, believing in my judgment while remaining available if I needed support. The months between accepting the invitation and the actual conference passed quickly, consumed with ongoing work demands and family life. Sophie finished her freshman year strong academically and socially. James thrived at Colorado State, visiting frequently enough that he still felt integrated into our household. My business continued expanding, requiring increasingly sophisticated systems and management approaches. By the time spring arrived and the Chicago conference approached, I felt solidly grounded in my identity and achievements. The prospect of potentially seeing Derek registered as a minor footnote rather than the central drama of the event. I was attending to deliver a keynote address about work that mattered, representing a business I'd built through genuine expertise and sustained effort. Derek's presence or absence was ultimately irrelevant to those facts. Nathan accompanied me to Chicago, using the trip as an opportunity for a few days together away from work and family responsibilities. We arrived 2 days before the conference began, spending time exploring the city and enjoying the rare luxury of unstructured time together. The conference venue was the Palmer House Hilton, a historic hotel in Chicago's Loop with ornate architecture and the bustling energy of several thousand educators gathering for professional development. I checked in for my keynote presentation the day before, reviewing audiovisual requirements and practicing my delivery in the empty ballroom that would fill with people the following morning. Walking through the conference registration area that evening, I scanned name badges without quite admitting I was looking for Derek's name. I didn't see him, though I recognized several other professionals I'd worked with over the years. The education world was simultaneously vast and surprisingly small, the same faces appearing at major conferences and in professional publications. The keynote presentation was scheduled for 9 the next morning, giving me a sleepless night despite having delivered this material countless times before. The scale felt different, the audience larger and more influential than typical training sessions. Nathan stayed awake with me, talking through the presentation points and reminding me that I'd earned this platform through years of competent work. Morning arrived with the particular clarity that comes after insufficient sleep and excessive anxiety. I dressed carefully in professional clothes that projected confidence, reviewed my notes one final time, and headed to the ballroom with Nathan beside me providing steady, grounding presence. The room filled quickly, educators streaming in with coffee and notebooks, the energy of people genuinely interested in learning rather than grudgingly attending mandatory training. From backstage I watched the audience settle, searching faces without quite knowing what I was looking for. Then I saw him. Derek, sitting in the third row slightly to the left, his expression neutral as he reviewed the conference program. He'd aged visibly since I'd last seen him at my wedding, his hair grayer and his face carrying lines that suggested stress or perhaps just the passage of time. Vanessa sat beside him, absorbed in her phone, and I recognized Derek's mother in the seat next to her. The sight of them triggered surprisingly minimal emotional response. Curiosity, perhaps. A distant recognition that these people had once been central to my life and now were simply strangers with shared history. No anger or hurt or need to prove anything. Just acknowledgement of what was. The conference organizer introduced me with a biography that outlined my credentials and achievements, the trajectory from classroom teacher to divorce to graduate school to independent consultant to published author and recognized expert. Hearing my journey summarized that way, I understood how remarkable the transformation had been, how many obstacles I'd navigated to arrive at this moment. I walked onto the stage to welcoming applause, found my position behind the podium, and looked out at thousands of faces waiting to hear what I had to say. Including Derek's face, watching with an expression I couldn't quite read from this distance. And I began to speak. The presentation flowed naturally, years of practice making the delivery feel effortless despite my awareness of Derek's presence in the audience. I spoke about recognizing signs of family trauma in classroom behavior, about creating safe spaces for students navigating parental conflict, about partnering with families rather than judging them. The frameworks I developed through research and lived experience resonated visibly, educators nodding and taking notes throughout. Halfway through, I shared the story that had become central to my work. A daughter accidentally recording her father telling her that her mother was too stupid to help with homework. The recording that later played in court, validating parental alienation concerns. The mother who used that devastating moment as motivation to rebuild her life and ultimately help thousands of children facing similar family dynamics. I didn't name Derek or provide identifying details, but his face paled noticeably as he recognized his own words and actions reflected back to him in this public forum. Vanessa glanced at him sharply, clearly making connections. His mother's expression shifted to something between shock and disappointment. The power dynamic couldn't have been clearer. Derek sat in the audience while I commanded the stage, his cruel assessment proven categorically wrong by the expertise I was demonstrating to thousands of professionals. But I felt no triumph or vindication in that moment, only profound gratitude that his judgment hadn't defined my trajectory. The presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, followed by a lengthy question period where educators asked thoughtful questions about implementation challenges and research methodology. Throughout, I remained focused on being genuinely helpful rather than performing expertise. The work itself mattered, not the validation it provided. Derek approached me afterward during the networking break, Vanessa trailing behind him with their toddler daughter in her arms. His mother had disappeared, perhaps unable to face me after hearing the presentation's revelations. "Lauren," he began awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. "That was an impressive presentation. I didn't realize you'd achieved so much." "Thank you," I said neutrally, offering nothing beyond basic courtesy. "About what you shared, the recording story," he continued, lowering his voice. "I want you to know I've regretted those words for years. The way I treated you during our marriage and after. I was wrong about so much." His apology was more thorough than the brief acknowledgement at my wedding, genuine remorse evident in his expression. Vanessa watched our interaction carefully, her face suggesting she'd heard some version of this history but perhaps not the full extent. "I appreciate you saying that," I responded honestly. "I hope you've learned to treat Vanessa and your daughter with more respect than you showed Sophie and me." "I'm trying," Derek said quietly. "Therapy has helped me understand how my behavior damaged people I was supposed to love. I'm genuinely sorry, Lauren. For all of it." His apology deserved acknowledgement even if it couldn't undo years of harm. "I'm glad you're working on yourself, Derek. That's important for your family's well-being." Vanessa spoke then, her voice carrying unexpected warmth. "Your daughter sounds remarkable, from what Derek has shared. You've clearly done an excellent job raising her despite difficult circumstances." The compliment, coming from the woman who'd replaced me in Derek's life, carried complicated weight. But I recognized it as genuine rather than patronizing, an acknowledgement from one mother to another. "Sophie is remarkable," I agreed. "She's taught me as much about resilience and grace as I've hopefully taught her." The conversation concluded with polite farewells, Derek's family moving on to other conference sessions while I was pulled into discussions with educators wanting to implement similar programs in their districts. I watched them go with a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed, recognition that Derek had become simply a person I used to know rather than someone whose opinion held power over my self-perception. Nathan found me during lunch, having watched the keynote from the back of the room. "You were magnificent," he said, pulling me into a quiet corner away from the networking crowds. "Confident and knowledgeable and genuinely helpful. Everything you've worked so hard to become was visible up there." "Did you see him?" I asked, though I knew he had. "Derek, in the audience?" "I did," Nathan confirmed. "And I saw you remain completely focused on the work and the people you were there to help rather than performing for him or against him. That's real strength, Lauren. Not caring anymore whether he validates you or not." His observation captured something essential. I hadn't been trying to prove Derek wrong during the presentation. I'd simply been doing work that mattered, sharing expertise I'd earned through sustained effort and genuine commitment. Derek's presence had been irrelevant to those facts, his opinion no longer a measure against which I evaluated my worth. The conference continued for 2 more days, filled with panels and workshops and networking opportunities. I saw Derek occasionally in passing, both of us offering polite nods without seeking further conversation. The panel discussion on educational innovation that we'd both been invited to participate in happened without incident, two professionals contributing our respective expertise to productive dialogue about improving educational environments. On the final evening, the conference hosted a reception for presenters and organizational leaders. I stood with Nathan talking to Caroline Stevens and Marcus Webb, who'd both flown in to attend my keynote and explore potential partnerships with other organizations. Derek approached our group briefly, introduced himself professionally to Marcus and Caroline, and thanked me again for my presentation's insights. The interaction was cordial and unremarkable, exactly what it should have been, two professionals with past personal history conducting themselves with mature respect in a professional context. No drama, no lingering resentment, just acknowledgement of shared space in the same field. Flying home to Denver the next day, I felt profound peace settle over me. The journey from devastated wife to recognized expert had been long and difficult, requiring sustained effort and constant choices to believe in my own worth despite messages to the contrary. But sitting beside Nathan at 30,000 feet, reviewing conference notes and planning follow-up with potential clients, I understood something fundamental. Derek's cruelty hadn't destroyed me. It had simply pushed me toward discovering capabilities I might never have developed if I'd remained in the comfortable limitation of our marriage. His dismissive assessment had been wrong, but more importantly, it no longer mattered. I'd built a life of genuine meaning and contribution, surrounded by people who valued me accurately and completely. The recording that had once felt like evidence of my inadequacy had become instead a reminder of how thoroughly I'd proven wrong anyone who underestimated me. Not through vindictive success or performed achievement, but through authentic growth and meaningful work. Sophie met us at the airport with James, both of them eager to hear about the conference and my presentation. As we drove home through Denver's evening traffic toward the life we'd built together, I felt grateful for every difficult choice and painful moment that had led to this point. I'd been told I was too stupid to help, too limited to achieve meaningful success. Every one of those assessments had been wrong, revealed as such not through argument but through lived proof of my actual capacity. The future stretched ahead full of continued challenges and opportunities, more children to help through my work, more programs to develop, more ways to contribute meaningfully. But in that moment, driving home with my family, I simply felt complete. Not because I'd proven Derek wrong, though I had. Not because I'd achieved professional success, though I had. But because I discovered who I actually was beneath years of accepting someone else's diminishing narrative about my worth. And that person, it turned out, was exactly who I'd needed to become all along. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.